Hello, and welcome to Hominind History Hub, a place where curiosity moves at a slower pace and the whole world feels just a little softer around the edges. Tonight, we're easing into a question people have wondered about, debated, and quietly carried in the back of their minds for longer than anyone can remember. It's an idea that sits right where science meets imagination, not in a dramatic or sensational way, but in a calm, steady way that invites your mind to drift. This time, we're exploring the possibility that civilizations may have existed long before our own, hidden beneath layers of earth, oceans, and everything the planet has reshaped over millions of years. It's not a question that demands proof. It simply invites you to wander through possibilities, to picture what might lie beneath the familiar ground we walk every day, and to follow curiosity wherever it naturally leads. Before we step into that quiet landscape of ideas, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your world right now. Maybe you're winding down after a long day, maybe you're resting in bed, or maybe you're drifting somewhere between awake and sleepy. If any of this brings you comfort or helps you relax, it would mean a lot if you left a like or subscribed, so this calm corner can reach others who need the same peace, but only if it feels right. The main goal here is simply to let yourself settle in and drift with the thoughts ahead. When we talk about civilizations that may have existed before us, the idea sounds simple at first. We picture ruins, temples, abandoned structures, the familiar signs of past human life. But once you look deeper, the question grows far larger than any one era or culture. Earth has been here for more than 4 billion years. Humans, the kind who build tools, stories, communities, have existed for only a tiny fraction of that time. When you put those facts side by side, it becomes easier to understand why this question keeps coming back. With so much time available, could other civilizations have risen and vanished long before we arrived? Could entire cultures have lived out their full histories and left almost nothing behind? This isn't about secret technology or dramatic ancient theories. It's about recognizing the scale of Earth's history and how little of it includes durable human-made traces. Nature erases things quickly when left alone. Wood rots, metal rusts, stone crumbles, soil shifts and water moves. Ice sheets grow and melt, mountains rise and collapse. In a few thousand years, landscapes can change so much that even cities we know existed become hard to find. If that's true for sites we can confirm, it opens the door to wonder about the ones we can't. People often imagine that any lost civilization must have been grand or global, but civilizations can take many forms. They can be small communities sharing traditions. They can be organized groups that leave no writing behind. They can build homes, tools, and art from materials that disappear quickly. And they can thrive for thousands of years before nature quietly wipes away their footprints. If you've ever walked through a forest and seen an old cabin swallowed by moss and vines, you've seen how fast the earth reclaims what we build. That happens in decades. Stretch that out to centuries, then thousands of years, then millions. Even the hardest materials eventually break down. Entire mountain ranges fade away over time. Coastlines shift, rivers carve new paths, volcanoes build new land as earthquakes reshape the old. Try imagining where our biggest cities will be in 10,000 years, then extend that imagination to 100,000, then a million. The picture dissolves. Scientists ask these questions too, not because there's evidence of ancient lost societies, but because the age of the planet reminds us how incomplete our archaeological record must be. Fossils from hundreds of millions of years ago survive only because bones can turn to stone under the right conditions. But things humans build are not bones. They rarely fossilize. They break, collapse, decay, or sink into the ground. Even our huge modern structures wouldn't survive long enough to become fossils. In a few thousand years, most would be gone completely, leaving behind faint chemical hints rather than anything recognizable. When we imagine the whole timeline of life on Earth, we see how small our known history really is. Written records go back only about 5,000 years. Farming and complex societies appeared tens of thousands of years before that. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Earlier human species lived for millions of years, but even all of that is still just a blink compared to Earth's full lifespan. The planet has been busy the entire time, shifting climates, changing landscapes, creating and erasing environments again and again. Whether life ever formed civilizations before ours is something science can't confirm, but the sheer size of the timeline keeps the question alive. What makes this topic comforting is that it doesn't demand a definite answer. It's more like a slow walk through possibilities than a hunt for conclusions. When we wonder about civilizations that might have come before us, we aren't assuming they were like us or had technology or cities. We're simply acknowledging that Earth is both ancient and restless, and many parts of its story are missing. In those missing chapters, it's fair to wonder what kinds of societies may have lived their entire existence long before the world looked anything like it does now. Coastlines help us understand this. Just 10,000 years ago, sea levels were far lower. Huge areas that are underwater today were once dry land. Many ancient settlements now lie beneath the ocean, buried under layers of sand and sediment. They didn't vanish in some dramatic event. The water simply rose. And if communities from only 10,000 years ago are underwater, imagine how much deeper the traces of anything older would be. Ocean floors are constantly recycled by tectonic forces. Entire sections of seabed sink back into the earth over millions of years. Anything built there would disappear along with it. The more we study Earth's natural cycles, the clearer it becomes that the human footprint is fragile. That fragility makes this question worth asking, not because lost civilizations definitely existed, but because if they did, finding evidence would be incredibly difficult, not impossible, just challenging in ways we're still figuring out. It's like trying to read a book where most of the pages have been worn away. You can still read parts of the story, but you know there's far more missing than visible. This topic also makes us reconsider what the word civilization truly means. We often think of cities, monuments, and durable architecture, but many cultures throughout history left almost nothing physical behind. Some used no stone, some kept knowledge through memory instead of writing, some built structures designed to disappear, some thrived in small numbers and never needed grand buildings. If we search only for monuments, we miss countless ways people have lived, learned, and built meaning. Archaeology often depends on tiny, fragile clues: a shard of pottery, a shaped bone, seeds preserved in a cave, ashes from a hearth, footprints captured in mud that hardened at the perfect moment. These are the rare survivors. Most human life vanishes completely. If that's true for recent history, it applies even more to times millions of years older. Earth never stays still. If you look at maps of ancient geological eras, continents drift like slow-moving puzzle pieces. Forests turn into deserts, deserts into grasslands, grasslands into marshes. The world reshapes itself again and again until it becomes nearly impossible to imagine what anything used to look like. And that ever-changing world is where this gentle question lives. When we talk about this idea, we're not trying to tell a dramatic story. It's simply a calm acknowledgement of how enormous Earth's timeline really is. Asking whether other civilizations might have existed before ours isn't an attempt to rewrite history. It's just an honest question about whether the history we know represents the entire picture, or only the portions that survived long enough for us to study. And because the planet hides so much beneath its surface, and because time stretches so far beyond the lifespan of any species, it starts to feel natural to wonder about things our current tools can't yet reach. As we ease deeper into this quiet discussion, we'll shift from the question itself to the way Earth preserves some parts of its past while completely erasing others. The point isn't to arrive at a firm conclusion. The point is to follow curiosity at a gentle pace, slow enough to let your mind settle as it wanders across the deep timeline under our feet. When you start thinking about what the Earth keeps and what it naturally removes, the scale of the challenge becomes clearer. Almost everything humans create is temporary, no matter how solid it appears while we're using it. To us, our buildings and objects feel strong and lasting, but on the scale of the planet, they're as fragile as marks in wet sand. A few cycles of weather, shifting soil, or simple erosion can erase something that once meant everything to the people who built it. And if enough time passes, even the faintest sign disappears. This is why ideas about earlier civilizations get tangled up with the fragility of memory, both human memory and the planet's memory. The Earth doesn't store every detail. It can't. There's simply too much time to hold on to everything. Think about a simple wooden shelter left in a forest. You can probably imagine how fast it would fall apart. A few seasons of rain and insects weaken it. A few decades break it down almost completely. After a century, only pieces hidden beneath soil or roots might remain. Give it a few hundred years more, and even those blend into the ground. Microbes, plants, and shifting soil erase the structure until it becomes impossible to separate from the environment around it. And that's just wood in open air. Even stone, something we often describe as eternal, isn't eternal at all. Stone expands and contracts with temperature, absorbs water, cracks under pressure, softens in the elements, and crumbles as plants push through it. Harder material simply buys more time, but the end result is the same when you stretch the clock far enough. Archaeologists understand this deeply. They've seen how entire cultures can vanish from sight, leaving behind only a few tools or remnants of fire. Even societies that used metal or carved stone rely heavily on luck for their artifacts to survive. Dry regions preserve things. Wet, acidic, or coastal environments destroy them quickly. Salt water is especially harsh. Metal objects can corrode into unrecognizable scraps. When you look at it this way, it becomes clear that the Earth is not an orderly librarian preserving every chapter. It mixes, dissolves, buries, and remakes its own surface again and again. And this isn't something that happens only in forests or scattered villages. Large cities, if abandoned, can disappear shockingly fast. Within a few decades, roofs collapse, bridges weaken, roads split open, and plants weave through every surface. What was once a structured human environment begins to look like wilderness again. Add earthquakes, flooding, landslides, or volcanic activity, and the process accelerates. Leave a city untouched long enough, and it eventually becomes just another part of the landscape. Only modern tools and careful excavation can reveal what once stood there. Now stretch that idea across geological time. A century barely registers. 1,000 years is a thin layer of soil. 10,000 years can shift climate patterns. 50,000 years can reshape entire regions. 100,000 years may erase mountain forms. 1,000,000 years changes coastlines and river systems. 10 million years rearranges continents. Hundreds of millions of years erase entire landscapes from existence. This is the backdrop for wondering whether civilizations came before ours. Even fossils, which people often treat as reliable snapshots of the past, are incredibly rare. Most organisms that have ever lived left no fossils at all. Fossilization needs very specific conditions: quick burial, the right minerals, low oxygen, long stability, and protection from disturbance. Without those, organic material disappears entirely. Human structures aren't built to fossilize. They decay, crumble, rust, or dissolve long before they can transform into stone. For a civilization to leave evidence millions of years later, they'd need to create deposits of unusual materials in environments perfect for preservation. Even then, they might show up as chemical traces or odd mineral patterns instead of recognizable artifacts. Memory works with similar fragility, just on a human timescale. Our minds preserve stories and ideas, but those memories shift and fade. Oral traditions survive only as long as a community remains connected. When people move, scatter, or vanish, their knowledge scatters with them. Written records provide stability, but they rely on materials that last. Countless ancient writings have already been lost to fire, moisture, insects, or simple decay. Many survive only as later copies with the originals long gone. Even in the earliest written histories, gaps are everywhere. Entire cultures appear suddenly and vanish without detailed explanation. And these gaps come from relatively recent times. Before writing, memory was carried only through teaching. Stories, instructions, shared practices passed down in person. That system works as long as nothing disrupts it. But if a community faces disaster, interruption, or decline, its knowledge can disappear in a generation or two. That's why the archaeological record for early humanity is so thin. Stone tools appear here and there. Fire pits give hints of gathering places. Bones reveal diets. Cave paintings offer glimpses of imagination. But these fragments don't speak the full story. They represent only the pieces that survived under ideal conditions. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived in ways that left minimal trace. They built shelters from materials that decayed quickly. They traveled, they adapted, they used tools effective for their needs, but fragile over long time spans. Their footprints washed away in the next storm, and many lived in environments where erosion constantly erased whatever they left behind. If civilizations existed before any known ones, they could have lived in forms that simply didn't preserve themselves. Their materials may have broken down quickly, their villages might have stood along coastlines now underwater, their communities could have spread across regions where thick vegetation or shifting land swallowed their traces. And if they lived tens of thousands or millions of years ago, almost nothing would remain to find. Scientists often say that if a civilization as advanced as ours existed millions of years ago, we'd expect to see unusual chemical signatures. But even this is complicated. Nature can create strange concentrations of metals, odd mineral formations, or layers that mimic industrial activity. Without clearly manufactured objects, the line between natural and artificial can blur, and manufactured objects would need to survive immense pressure, heat, and erosion, challenges few materials can endure over millions of years. When you weave all this together, the fragility of evidence, the planet's constant reshaping, and the limitations of memory, it becomes obvious how incomplete our understanding of the past must be. We're trying to assemble a vast story from a handful of surviving pages. The timeline we understand clearly stretches back a short distance. Beyond that, we rely on fossils, chemical clues, and geological layers. These tools are powerful, but they only show broad strokes. Our modern world makes us think our structures are permanent because we see concrete, steel, and huge cities. But on geological scales, even these vanish quickly. If humanity vanished tomorrow, nature would reclaim everything in just a few centuries. Within thousands of years, most traces would crumble. Within a million, even foundations might warp beyond recognition. The earth is always shifting, wearing down and rebuilding itself. Nothing stays fixed. Seen from this perspective, the possibility of unknown civilizations becomes less unusual, not because we assume they existed, but because we recognize how easily their traces could disappear. The planet has gone through landscapes so different from today that entire eras would be unrecognizable. Seas have risen and fallen, ice sheets have grown and melted, forests have turned to deserts and back again, mountains have risen, then worn away into plains. And when we reach back to the earliest periods of human life, what stands out most is how silent the record becomes, not because early people were inactive, but because so little survived. Nearly all of human existence unfolded before writing. People lived full and complex lives, but the evidence doesn't remain in forms we can study. Writing arrived very late in our story, only a few thousand years ago. That means almost everything humans experienced happened without written records. Before writing, information traveled through memory and teaching, and if those chains were broken, knowledge faded. Traditions changed, details blurred, origins disappeared, myths grew from memories whose sources were long forgotten, stories shifted with each retelling, and meanings changed with time. That's why myths across the world echo each other, familiar themes, but altered shapes. They may carry traces of older experiences, but not the full record. Humans lived through dramatic climate shifts long before writing appeared. Entire ice ages came and went, sea levels changed massively, continents reshaped themselves. Through all of that, people adapted, moved, learned, and survived, but wrote nothing down. And so, most of that immense span remains quiet, hidden in the spaces where the earth has already erased the details. Landscapes didn't just shift during past climate changes, they turned into entirely different worlds. As conditions changed, people moved, adjusted their tools, or reshaped the way they lived. Many of the places where early humans once thrived are now underwater, eroded away, or buried beneath deep layers of earth. Shores that hosted entire communities are now far below the surface of modern oceans. Valleys that once held large populations sit under centuries of river deposits. Volcanic events sealed off some regions and wiped out others completely. Whatever stood in those places is now out of reach without technology far more advanced than what we commonly use today. If a group lived along a coastline back when sea levels were much lower, everything they built, homes, tools, and everyday objects, would now rest underwater. That doesn't require imagining a highly developed society. Even simple villages leave recognizable signs when conditions favor preservation. But the ocean isn't gentle. Underwater archaeology is extremely challenging. Currents shift the seafloor. Marine life destroys anything organic. Metal corrodes. Sand blankets one area and then pulls away to expose another. When a site stays intact long enough for us to find it, it's because of rare luck, not normal conditions. Most evidence breaks apart or disappears long before anyone ever gets the chance to discover it. Even on dry land, physical traces from pre-writing eras rarely survive. Over thousands of years, new layers of soil form from decaying plants, pulling buried objects deeper. Heavy rains, floods, and erosion can churn these layers, mixing items from different periods together. Something originally lying on the surface may end up meters underground. Other pieces vanish entirely. Archaeologists usually rely on unusually stable environments, caves, deserts, or volcanic ash, to find well-preserved artifacts. Outside these special conditions, the record becomes incredibly thin and hard to interpret. The tools and shelters used by early humans make this problem even harder. Most things people relied on day to day were made from materials that naturally rot. Wood, woven fibers, plants, unfired clay, and animal skins don't last in ordinary environments. Bone and antler last longer, but even they break down in the wrong type of soil. Only stone tools routinely endure for tens of thousands of years. Because of that, we often describe early eras through the lens of stone technology alone, but stone captures only a tiny portion of what people actually made. It doesn't show clothing, baskets, containers, shelters, boats, traps, musical instruments, or countless forms of art. Early human life was far more diverse than the surviving objects suggest. Communities in warm climates likely wove detailed items from plants. Those in cold regions must have created clothing and shelters that helped them survive harsh seasons. Groups living near water developed techniques for building boats and storage systems using materials that leave no long-lasting trace. Their knowledge systems, healing traditions, and social structures existed fully, yet almost none of that left behind something durable enough to survive into the present. Human movement adds another layer of disappearance. People have always been mobile, especially when the environment shifted. Mobility helps groups survive short-term challenges, but it also means they leave behind fewer permanent structures. A community that relocates every season or every few years doesn't build monuments or large villages. They adapt to the land instead of reshaping it. This lifestyle is efficient and sustainable, but almost invisible when viewed through archaeology. Over thousands of years, an area could support generation after generation, while leaving behind almost nothing we can identify today. As we stretch our view further back in time, uncertainty grows. Before modern humans, earlier human species lived across vast periods. Some crafted tools, used fire, and formed social groups that lasted for ages, yet the evidence they left is sparse. The landscapes where they lived have transformed again and again. Ancient rivers changed course, lakes dried out, forests grew where grasslands once stretched, ice sheets advanced and retreated. The environments that shaped their lives no longer exist, and with no written record, their experiences remain silent. When we imagine human societies before known history, we have to accept that not every successful culture follows the same path. A community could develop a stable, organized way of life without building stone temples, farming on a large scale, or settling in one place permanently. They might have created complex systems of knowledge perfectly suited to their surroundings without producing anything that could survive in the ground for millennia. If these groups lived in areas now heavily altered or destroyed, the chances of discovering their remains are extremely small. The long, quiet stretch before writing wasn't empty. It reflects how difficult it is for information to survive over deep time. Even after writing appeared, records were still vulnerable. Fires destroyed libraries. Wars disrupted centers of learning. Paper and ink decayed. Even carvings on stone eventually wore away. If writing itself struggles to survive for thousands of years, the absence of writing makes earlier periods even harder to reconstruct. Researchers sometimes talk about an archaeological visibility threshold. This means a society must leave behind a certain amount of durable material for us to detect it today. Below that level, even a thriving community may leave almost no visible trace. A group could live rich cultural lives for thousands of years, yet remain invisible to modern research simply because their materials decayed. Once writing emerged, it captured only a small slice of global cultures. Many societies continued relying on oral traditions, passing down knowledge in ways that shifted naturally over generations. When these groups eventually blended with others or changed their ways of life, their older stories faded. What remains today often looks simpler than it was because so much detail was lost. Myths from later cultures carry fragments of ancient experiences, memories of migrations, dramatic weather changes, or natural events like floods and